Alright guys, hey, welcome back to our second video. As we were speaking about in our first video, we were talking about doctor positioning and we were talking about patient positioning. And we want to get into leverage right now. So it's really important that when we are setting up our patients that we're maximizing the use of leverage so it's really easy to move them around the table. Okay, we see a lot of chiropractors hurting themselves in practice, and it's because they're not using leverage correctly. So they're trying to move big people around the table and they're not using proper leverage, which we'll get into now. When we're actually making the adjustments, we want to decrease the leverage. Okay, so we're going to get into that a little bit now with some practical examples.
Yeah, so if you guys remember way back in high school physics and stuff like that, remember Archimedes, he talked about if you give me a lever long enough, I can lift the world. And so basically the idea is the longer this lever, the longer it gets away from our axis of rotation, well then you can put less force in here to get movement here, okay? That's appropriate if you're trying to set the person on the table up and you want to use as little force as possible to create this movement, okay? Now, the counter of that is when you're going to adjust, the last thing you want to do is use this large lever to put tons of force into this tiny little joint. It's unnecessary. If we can remove the tension in the setup, and we're set up in a way where our force is very efficient, it really doesn't require leverage. And then the last thing, and this is super important for the chiropractor's body, and we're going to go into that. Aaron gave you a prelude to it, but say we're setting up to make the adjustment. Well, the longer our arms are, or the more our body or center of mass gets away from the axis of rotation or the joint that we're adjusting, the more we're amplifying forces in our own body. And this is why we're seeing people get their wrist hurt, their low back hurt, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go through a couple of examples.
Yeah, the biggest one that we see with chiropractors is side posture adjusting and shoulders. And so we're gonna get into that now.
Cool. So let's have a look at this. I'll take this here, buddy. I'll have you lay on your side facing me, please. Just gonna pop this microphone on. Beautiful. So one of the biggest things that we see with people, and this is across the board, is what they're gonna do is you're trying to adjust an SI joint or lumbar. Okay, side posture. Well, obviously the joints are back here and you're trying to move this. So what a lot of people will do is they'll use this as a lever, bring this way over, crank the tension in there, long lever here, and then try and put this force in. Now, if I do just this, it's not too hard on my body, but Aaron will tell you that's not gonna feel really great in the thoracolumbar junction.
Exactly.
Okay, and it's creating a lot more rotation because you're using these long levers, and even if you can somehow make it specific, with a specific contact, it's not nice into this system. We don't want to create these rotary forces, okay? Now, what's the flip side of that? Maybe I don't put a lot of rotation into him, but how can I put a lot of leverage into my body? Well, say that I have him here and I crawl over and I throw my elbow out in this direction and say, I use this leg against this leg and I'm out like this. So I'm trying to adjust this joint. So the more I get my center of mass away from that joint, the more leverage is going into my wrist, my elbow, and my shoulder. Okay, if you're a really big, strong guy with a small person, you can get away with it for a while. But there's a much easier way. If I want to adjust that, what I really want to do is get my center of mass as close to that as possible and completely minimize leverage. So rather than being out like this, what I want to do is bring him to me just like that. Very easy. I use my body. Regardless of your physical stature as a chiropractor, even a very small person adjusting a large person, the joint is very small. If you can get your body in a mechanically advantageous position, it's going to be very, very easy, okay?
So just for a little feedback on that, it's like I've been adjusted by many chiropractors over the last 20 years. What I love about this style of adjusting is just like, there's complete ease in my body. There's no tension in there. I didn't even expect it, and all of a sudden it just was this explosion from the inside out, right at that specific joint. So that's what we want for people. People don't need to feel it coming. They don't need to feel that windup of tension in there, because as they do that, and they're tighter, what do you have to do? You have to use way more force to move the joint. And then that creating more force there just ends up hurting you. So it's not nice for anybody.
How about you show them with thoracics how a lot of people end up adding leverage into their own body?
Yeah. Okay, so basically what happens is, we want to make sure that we're, just like Patrick was saying, we're as close as possible to them. So what we see happen a lot of times is people go back to do an anterior and they'll go like this and they'll end up coming off the ground and they're on one foot and they're away from the body and then they'll jump on the patient like this, okay? We don't want that. We want to stay just as close as possible. My body's nice and close to him. Here, tucked in nice and close, and I'm just going to come back and keep my body right next to him, let him fall, and boom, we adjust like that.
Easy. Easy,
Good.
easy.
We want to be close, and we don't want to have distance in between us and the patient.
And the last thing, it may not seem like much, but if you do this for an entire career, it will make a difference. Now, say that we're wanting to create an adjustment and in the cervicals. Well, there's not a lot of resistance here in the cervicals, but it's still enough that if you do it all the time, you can end up injuring your wrist, injuring your fingers, if you're trying to create this leverage. Okay, if my vector is going to go here, or a lot of people adjust in the facet plane over here, my arm is out that way, and I'm creating leverage into my wrist and into my shoulder. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we get our body behind wherever we're going. Okay, so in this case, the way that we show with coupled movement is we'll be going towards the opposite shoulder. We go into that in great detail, the reason why. But basically, if I'm going here, I want my entire body lined up in this direction so that I could do this for the rest of my life, and it's super easy, and he'll tell you there's no leverage, there's no torquing, there's no tension in his neck. So the big takeaway for that is maximize leverage in positioning. Okay, let me have you go on your side one more time because this is important. If I need to position Aaron, well, I don't want to be lifting him up and putting leverage into my own body. I'm going to use the leverage of his body to position him. So very easily I can take his knee and underneath the iliac crest, and I can move him around as needed with no effort whatsoever. So we use leverage in the setup, we minimize leverage in the adjustment. Great.
Hope you guys enjoyed that video. Give it a try, let us know how it goes, and we'll see you in the next video.